Hi, everyone. My name's Jamie. Welcome to this virtual event with Brandy Colbert in conversation with Mikki Kendall and Samira Ahmed for Brandy's new book, The Voting Booth. Like I said, my name's Jamie. I'm the Director of Operations at Women and Children First. We begin all of our virtual events the same way that we begin the events in store, with a land acknowledgement. Please join me just take a moment to acknowledge that the land on which the bookstore stands is the occupied, unceded territory of the Peoria, Potawatomi, Miami, and Sioux people. We encourage you to find more about land acknowledgements and about the rightful owners of the land where you are viewing tonight's event at www.native-land.ca. Thank you. Our bookstore just reopened for in-store browsing today, but you can still support us through our online store. We also have a full lineup of virtual events that you can check out on our website. Some logistical crowdcast information you might need to know. During the event, if you have a question for any of our authors, you can use the Ask a Question button at the bottom of your screen. You can also utilize the chat bar on the side of the screen to talk to one another and to virtually applaud our authors. You can also buy a copy of The Voting Booth by clicking the Buy a Book box right below the screen. With that housekeeping out of the way, let's turn our attention to our authors for this evening. Brandy Colbert is the author of several books for young readers, including the Stonewall Award-winning Little and Lion. The Voting Booth is her newest book. Yes, and tells the story of Marva and Duke, two 18-year-olds navigating a series of challenges on their first election day. The book exposes so many of the obstacles that our government has put up for young people and people of color especially when they're trying to express their fundamental voting rights in a way that is timely, infuriating, and yet ultimately full of hope. This country is full of young people, just like Marva and Duke, who are not willing to be silenced anymore, and they're going to change this world. Brandy is joined in conversation by local authors Samira Ahmed and Mikki Kendall. Samira is the author of 3 young adult books, most recently Mad, Bad, and Dangerous to Know, and a great friend of the bookstore.
Yeah, I love women.
Mikki Kendall, also a great friend of the bookstore, works include Amazon's Abolitionist and Activist, and the recent bestseller, Hood Feminism.
Yeah.
Please join me in welcoming these 3 amazing authors who show in their writing that educating through entertainment, like literature, is an act of activism. Thanks so much.
Thank you. So I think I'm just going to start out with a short reading, just to sort of introduce you all to the book. So this is The Voting Booth, and it's told in dual points of view from, as she mentioned, Marva and Duke. So I'm going to read a chapter from Marva's point of view. So, I can't believe how long this line is. I don't care how nerdy I look. I can't stop the giant smile that's spreading across my face as more and more people join behind me. I'm at the very front, of course, armed with my first coffee of the day and my completed sample ballot, though I know all the candidates and measures I'm choosing by heart. I'll be in and out in 10 minutes. I have this so perfectly timed that I'll still get to school with 20 minutes to spare. I check my phone, but still no text from my boyfriend. What the hell? I guess technically it's my turn to respond, but what he's doing is unacceptable. How can he just change like this when he's been my boyfriend for more than 2 years? I glance behind me to see how the line is shaping up. It's mostly people my parents' age, but there are a few younger ones too. No other high school kids, though. I'd like to think that's because they're all coming after school, but I'm not that naive. All that time I spent canvassing, phone banking, and text banking made it crystal clear just how many people want nothing to do with implementing change in this world. The guy about a dozen people back might be my age. He's so tall, though, it's hard to tell. He has light brown skin, close-cropped reddish brown hair, and big hands that keep drumming a rhythm on his thighs. He's wearing giant black headphones, and I wonder what he's listening to as I turn back around. The front door to the church opens, and a gray-haired woman with a sunny smile props it wide with a doorstop. Morning, folks, and happy election day. The polls are officially open. I swear I get the chills. The women behind the check-in table greet me with a smile and point me to the voting booth. I stop and stare. It's not the first time I've been in one. I've gone with Mom and Dad several times over the years, but this is all me, my decisions, my chance to try to change the things I'm sick and tired of, just like my hero, Fannie Lou Hamer. Everything okay? Asks the woman sporting an auburn braid that trails over her shoulder. Oh, yes, sorry. I sip from my coffee and smile. I'm just so excited to be here. This is my first time voting. She smiles back. Good on you doing your part. Oh, lady, if you only knew. I step into the booth and take a deep breath to orient myself in this moment, but also to take in every part of the voting experience. It smells musty. I insert my ballot like the woman instructed and flip open the guide. All the propositions and candidates are there, just like I memorized weeks ago. But I can't help going through each one to make sure the issues I'm really here for are still there. Things my parents say this country has been fighting over for decades: healthcare, gun control, climate change, social justice, things that should have been solved decades ago. I take my time to read each paragraph and carefully fill in the circles on my ballot, a surge of pride coursing through me with each vote I make. I don't know how my boyfriend can say this doesn't matter. When I'm done, a man with round glasses takes my ballot and feeds it into the machine. Thank you for voting, he says, handing me a giant sticker that says, I voted. I immediately peel it off, press it over my heart, and say, thank you. I must have taken longer than I thought, because the guy with the headphones is standing at the check-in desk, talking to the red-braided woman. His headphones are looped around his neck now. The woman scans the list all the way from top to bottom, page to page, until she gets to the end. She looks up at him and shakes her head. Sorry, she says, her face sincerely full of apology. You're not on the list.
Getting back. I think. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Hi,
you're back.
I love hearing that. I love that chapter. I think Mickey's going to be coming back.
Yeah.
And for some reason, it's not bringing up.
There you are.
camera.
There you are. Hi.
Yeah, hi.
Are you gonna? How would you like us to? Should we just jump in, Mickey? You want to
Yeah.
start?
Let's just jump in.
Leaps, shenanigans.
Let's start with just the first question, which I ask every author, even though I know it's the generic question, but like, was there a specific impetus or incident that made you want to write this book? Because it's pretty specific and takes place all on a specific day.
Right. Yeah, there wasn't a specific impetus, but I feel like I've sort of been approaching these topics in my books for a while, here and there, like mentioning a lot of the things, the issues that are covered in this book. And then it was like, well, we have an election year. And, I kind of remember when, I was a teenager in the 90s. I think we're all sort of similar-ish ages. And but you guys remember Rock the Vote that MTV used to do.
Yes.
So I was just like parked in front of MTV like all day long, pretty much in the 90s. And I just remember that being just like inundating me. So like my parents, of course, told me that, voting is important. It's your civic duty. You have to do it. But it's like I haven't seen any sort of, I know there are still campaigns out there, but it feels like there's really not much that's speaking to teenagers and reminding them that their voices can be heard. So it was like, all right, what if I just put it in a book and literally just talk about, these teens going for a whole day and all the obstacles and adventures that they have to face when they're voting.
So for me, it was really interesting because we just, my oldest, we took him to vote for the first time. Yes. And it was, I guess it never occurred to me people didn't take their kid to vote.
Oh, man, yeah.
Right. So I was like, oh, she's going by herself. Oh, she's real responsible. I guess we couldn't make that choice. We could have let him like go alone. But I was like, oh, we're going to vote because we go vote as a family anyway. We're going to vote, and it's your first time, and mommy is there for all your first time.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't remember. In my event last night, I was asked like if I remember the first time I voted, and it's so vague. And so I'm going to ask my mom, because I remember going as a kid with my parents when they voted, but I don't know. I missed like the cutoff right after, like the election was right before I turned 18, the one that I could have voted in, and so I didn't get to vote till I was 21, and I don't really remember anything about it. So I feel like I could have gone by myself, like Marva did, but I don't remember if my parents went with me. I'm not sure.
I was, during 2008 with Obama, I was a deputy field organizer. So when I was, on election day, I was sort of just at different polling places to make sure things were going smoothly and stuff like that. Because what happens in this book, which is people getting denied, happens, and people don't know, like, I demand a provisional ballot, and I would literally give them language. But I saw a lot of kids, like, especially with that election, that was like, young people were, I think, really inspired. So I did see a lot of kids voting, but I was also like, wait, is this your first time voting? Shouldn't someone take a picture of you or something? Like, I don't know. This is like a big deal. To me, it's like a bigger deal than getting your driver's license.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really is a big deal. So that's interesting. I didn't even think about that. But I feel like Marva in this book is just like, she makes her own rules, and she probably was just like, no, I'm not even going with you guys. I want this moment to myself. So yeah.
Yeah, Marva seems really tapped in. I know that the first time I voted, I did go by myself. I had just joined the military, but I hadn't left yet. Right at the election. And I remember that basically I was sort of yes, no, like I didn't know yet enough to look up the different judges and their records. Yeah. So I was sort of going off, I've seen this person on the news and it was bad kind of voting.
Yeah.
Not necessarily as informed as Marva. I was like, oh, you're really paying attention. I wish you'd been around. Yeah. I knew the major stuff, but I didn't yet know how important it is to vote in between. And I really appreciated you talking about that, about the bond issues and the other things that come up. Because I think a lot of times people get upset because things don't change when they vote every 4 years. Mm-hmm. But those municipal elections, those every 2-year elections, those really matter. In some ways, those matter more than the presidential.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's what gets your snow plowed on your street.
For Illinois, that's why we are not one of the states currently going through some things. We just expanded Medicaid because we voted for people who would vote for that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nice. Our last election cycle, we decided that we were really going to show you what a blue machine does. It might be able to, but really hard to be a Republican candidate in Illinois right now.
Yeah.
I did vote twice in Illinois. I lived there for 4 years.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah, I did. I got to vote for president while I lived there, so that was nice. I do remember that. That was very,
I think it was cool that you brought that up, because people, I think, sometimes don't realize, like, when you're voting for president, you got to vote for everything on, those referendum measures and everything. And one thing that's interesting, and this kind of gets into the education thing a little bit, which is, in New York, it's tied into sort of like the language that's used in those referendums, because some of them are super long, like this much text. And a lot of them are like written like by people who clearly do not know how to write specific and clear English. And and that really speaks to this privilege too, around voting. And you kind of talk about privilege in the book in a number of ways. And I thought it was cool that you addressed that too, because that you brought that up, because a lot of times people don't realize like all the things that you actually are voting for and how much that can impact you. And like in California, you guys have a lot of stuff you have so many propositions to vote on.
Yeah, so many. I mean, so I remember when I was in Chicago, when I lived there, and I had a friend, and, all of my friends and I were all talking about voting and all of that. And then one of our friends told us that she didn't vote. And I like screamed at her. I don't think we got in a fight because she couldn't defend herself. So she was just kind of like, okay, I'm just going to take it. But so that was something I was also thinking about when I was writing it. I was just like, I can't believe like you have this privilege where you would not exercise your right to vote. Like there's so many, just all the things I get into in the book. Like there's people who've died for this. My ancestors are from the South and they could not vote without, the extreme threat of violence or, repercussions like losing their jobs and things like that. So I think I got through to her. She made sure to tell me the next time that she voted. But yeah, so I wanted to sort of like, show that in the book, that like how important it is, and how even like there's people who do vote, but like they kind of like that woman she runs into, her dad's coworker, she's like, I voted, but like she's just doing it to look good, which, I guess if you're voting, it's better than not voting. But if you're voting for the wrong reasons, I don't know how good that is either. So.
I mean, I think that's one of the things, though, that's sort of interesting, because we don't have compulsory voting like you do in Australia or in some of the other countries. And, there are a lot of Americans who feel like voting is useless because functionally for them, nothing changes from elections like general election cycle.
Mm-hmm.
As we're seeing during the pandemic, the
Yeah,
consequences
yeah.
will take a little longer to clean up than 2 years or 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it was really good to kind of show the breadth of people who might be voting, who might, as your boyfriend, doesn't see the point, that kind of thing. Because voting in America is such a fraught topic, both because of voting rights being under attack and voter suppression, but also because we sort of wandered into this weird place where people think they have to like every candidate they're going to vote for and everything.
Right.
And the language is written sometimes in those propositions to be deliberately misleading. I'm thinking of Prop 8 in California, where people thought they were voting for one thing and they were actually voting for the opposite. And, one of the things Obama did do was really kind of push in that Plain Language Act so that government speak on paperwork was actually English, because it's a particular skill to be able to write in government speak and convince people for something they didn't want in the first place. I'm not going to say that that's a skill that's a good one, but it does exist.
Yeah, it's a skill.
I did appreciate that the book kind of gets into how people might feel like voting is useless, as well as why people feel voting is important. Because I think sometimes we don't talk to young people in particular. Like, those of us who've been around since the 90s and whatever, we did have rock the vote and all of those things. But I've seen things subsequently, but they mostly focus on college age, not necessarily on high school age. They tend to get out the vote on a college campus. And your average high school senior, some are going to be too young, but your average high school senior is either 18 or about to turn 18. We're not talking to them. We're not talking to 16 or 17-year-olds. We're expecting them to go off to college and then go through a series of hoops that may exist in terms of having mail-in ballots and all these other things, because their home address is different from where their school is. It's an elaborate construction in America to vote in some places.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I really appreciated showing how difficult it can be even if you think you did everything right, there's so many steps to being registered to vote in the right place. And then along the way, they sort of explore why people may not be doing voting, or maybe voting, like you said, just because everybody else is. I'm going to admit that I was jealous that there were stickers, because I really miss my stickers. We get wristbands.
Yeah, we get wristbands.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't think I have one with me. I should have saved one. You get a little wristband, which
oh, wow.
I actually have a question. It kind of relates to that. So, because early on in the book, I thought it's interesting because you have this young woman, Marva, who's like really an activist. She's like really tapped into like a lot of things, but she's presented with two young men in her life. One who wants to vote, but can't, or is having trouble, and she like puts a lot of energy into trying to see if she can fix that. And then the other young man who's closest to her, who's just like, I don't know if there's what the point is, and there's no. I think he uses a two-party system as an excuse to not vote. And I guess my question to both of you actually is like, at what point, like, how do you expend the energy you have, like in this situation, how Marva chose to, like, when is it like, yes, I have to expend this energy or to try to convince this person to vote, or this is futile and I need to expend my energy on this other person who I can get that. Like, I think it's interesting, especially like when you see like in social media where there's pressure trying to be applied on getting people to do it. I'm sort of like, what works? What's like the goal? I mean, how can young people, especially like Marva, make that measure?
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, I have a person I'm not going to name in my family who they, voted for like an independent in this last election. I know that's why I'm not naming this person. It's not my parents. I will say that it is not my mom and dad. And it was just really upsetting. But also after years of speaking to this person, I know that nothing I say is going to really change their view on that. And, they know how dangerous that is and what that, helps lead to. So for me, I don't know. I kind of tap out after a while, and I'm just like, I've got to kind of move on to people who are going to listen to me and who are actually willing to try to help make this change. I think that people who are really intent on, like not supporting the two-party system and that kind of thing, like I don't want to say they're too far gone, but to me, I kind of feel like my energy is best spent other places and educating people who may not have had those resources, or, who didn't realize the measures behind all these, the facts behind all these measures and policies and everything. So yeah, I don't know. That kind of feels defeatist, and like maybe I'm not like trying as hard as I can. But for me, I kind of, that energy turns to anger, and then that doesn't feel like it's being super productive. What about you, Mikki?
I sort of twist it the other way, and I point out that if they want a more than two-party system, so the way to get more than two parties is not to bow out, but to not only be part of the process as a voter, but then to consider backing those candidates, asking those third parties, there's always a third party, whether it's Green or one of the others, to step up, not just for presidential elections, but for all the other.
Exactly.
And I tend to encourage people who feel like voting is useless to do other political things, right? And that's not necessarily protest, that maybe letter writing, that may be going to those really boring, Chicago loves a really boring one in particular, school board and other meetings, right? Those meetings that go on 5,000 years. And they're set up at the oddest times, specifically really to dissuade people from going. And so I try to encourage them to get into the process in the ways they feel comfortable. Because oddly enough, watching bad school board meetings or other bond measures sort of trickle their way through does more work to get people to vote, I feel like, than telling people they should vote or that their vote matters. I feel like having them see how the process works in the absence of voters makes them get all fired up and feel like they should be participating more and they should have more of a say. This may be in part because I keep thinking, I don't know if you all saw that video where there was a meeting about racist iconography with statues and stuff. And the woman
the woman who was shopping online, that one?
Yes.
Oh, that was LA. Yeah.
Oh, that was LA. Okay.
Yeah, I watched that too. Yeah.
And put that out to people that those folks aren't listening to you because they don't have to.
I know that wasn't LA, but sorry, I remember the one. Yeah.
Yeah. Carol or something, whatever.
Yeah, Carol.
Yeah. I was thinking
I'm here talking to you, Carol. That was that guy.
Yes,
I'm going to direct
yes.
to you, Carol.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Good. I mean, I think people don't realize in these small, and especially in local elections or even in big cities, in like the smaller elections, how few votes there are and how much things can actually shift. Or like in a place like, you know, what happened with Stacey Abrams in Georgia. I mean, like, you know, I think there are so many situations, or even in primaries, which we've seen where progressive have, for example, come really close, but not quite, like where those things do really make a difference. But I know, yeah, it is tough when I do think like, well, there's limited energy, and like Marva, I think it's pretty amazing what she does. Number one, she actually knows, she's like one of the most educated voters out there because she knows about provisional ballots. She knows, like, you know, she was like, you can check online if you are registered to vote and where you should be voting. And I think it's hard to get that. I'm glad that that's like in a YA book where I was like, wow, every single thing in here is like, because that happened so many times. Like I was, you know, during the Kerry Bush, I was on the phones with Ohio, and there were so many irregularities happening at the voting booth, and I was literally one of those people that people would call, and I would say like, okay, now you have to ask for this and use this language and do this, but it's also like a very complicated system.
It is. I mean, so, you know, a lot of this I knew just from experience or from reading, but there was like some research to do like about the provisional ballots. And so I feel like I learned a lot too. So I was really happy to just be able to hopefully put that in as naturally, you know, because I never want like the book to feel didactic or like, you know, this is not a lesson. I still want it to be like somewhat enjoyable. That's why there's like a cat and some kissing in there. But, you know,
it wasn't didactic. I mean, it was like, I felt like I was watching a rom-com happen during the election.
Right.
Okay, good.
That's what I felt like, you know, so I'm gonna say this now. We're gonna see a Disney version, right? Or Nickelodeon. We're gonna see you on Netflix.
I hope so.
Yeah, I would love that. It was perfect for that. Mickey
right.
just put it out there.
Right?
Everybody listen to Mickey.
Yes.
I hope so. I mean, I think
but it felt like one of those shows where, you know, all the boys I've loved before, any of those other things that we've seen play out, but there was also voting.
Yeah.
And I could have happily sat a kid of mine who we have a 14-year-old, so Lord. Yeah, that's where this book is going.
I know, I was going to say, I hope you pass it on.
Yes. But my 14-year-old in front of that show where to exist. And here, yes, totally get into the story. That kid looks like you. He's running all over. That kid could be like you.
Mm-hmm.
And coincidentally, while you're into this story and all of that, you learn a whole bunch about voting, and it's not mom lecturing you. You just get to learn.
Exactly. Yeah, that's my hope. So I'm glad it came across that way.
So I have this quote, Mikki, it's from Hood Feminism. And I was thinking about it a lot because I think Marva what I love is that she's like an activist and she's a feminist. So she's like a political activist, she's a feminist. And Mikki, in Hood Feminism, you say, there's nothing feminist about having so many resources at your fingertips and choosing to be ignorant. And I thought that was such a great quote for Marva. I was like, Mikki wrote this is so perfect for this, because Marva kind of embodies that in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, I love that quote. Mikki, do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
I was just going to say, one of the things that actually really made me warm up to Marva was actually how much work Marva puts in to educate herself, right? There's something about, and it's great that she's advocating for others, but there's just something really great about Marva recognizing throughout, over and over again, that the information is at her fingertips, and so she should access it herself, and she should encourage other people to access the information. Because sometimes in YA books, you start to kind of feel like, gah, grow up just a teeny bit, use the Googles, use the library.
Right.
That's what I'm supposed to say because of children. That's what I feel like. But I didn't do a lot of research and reading. I was just pre-Google, so it wasn't easy. And so I appreciate that. I appreciate her looking at the resources, knowing that she's got so much, and then trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, thanks. I like that too, because it might be like my journalism background, but like the amount of people that I see on even like Twitter who are just like, well, what's that? And I'm like, in the time it took you to type out that question, you could have been on Google finding out for yourself. But also I just think, like when I was in school, I hated history class because, I'm sure Mikki, whenever it got to like the 2 days we spent on Black history, it was just like,
I know, only in February too.
Exactly, only in February, like.
And the same, like 4 people. You only had you would think Black history.
There is. It's only Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, like.
Yep. And those were the only 2 I ever learned about in school growing up, and it was just like, like people were enslaved, and then the civil rights movement happened, and now we're all free and it's fine. And that obviously was completely inaccurate, and I just feel like I never got the actual like training in history that I needed, and so I thought I hated it. And then I come to graduate and years later realize I love history. I'm so intrigued by it. There's so much to learn and so much to educate yourself on, and especially growing up in like an area where I did. So when I voted in my first election, I was living in Springfield, Missouri, which is the Ozarks, which is a very white area, very conservative. And, the people there weren't as educated about history, sometimes willfully, sometimes just ignorant because they hadn't been taught the same as I did, and they didn't, take that chance to try to learn on their own. But, having sort of like, when I'm talking to people and things get heated and there's like a debate, I want to be informed and I want to know as much as I can so I can bring historical context into things. So I really wanted to write this character who was really into doing that as well, and knowing things a lot earlier than I knew, I guess. I don't know if her school is any better than mine, but.
Well, and I think part of that, so because I was in the Midwest and we, I'm in the city founded by a Black family, we got Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, Jean-Baptiste Point, right? And sometimes, not always, we either learned Peanuts, right? So Carver, right, Washington, and then sometimes we sort of detoured and we might get like, surprise, here's a sports figure, right? And that was it though. We weren't, right? And I went to Cape Way. I was in a majority Black grammar school. So I learned all of these other people, but then for high school, I was no longer with a Black history teacher. And I thought I no longer liked history. That history had been fun for like social studies was fun, but history was terrible because I learned a bunch of dates. I can tell you the Battle of Hastings happened in 1066. I don't know why I know that. I looked it up and it still seems the most relevant thing I had to memorize for a test, but memorize and I did. I wrote an entire history book. That's why I wrote Amazon's Abolitionist and Activist, because it felt like we learned history in a way that erased every woman, just about, and absolutely everyone of color, and also all of the most interesting details about the story of humans.
Hold it
right?
up.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Um,
Some history in there. That's the
yeah,
missing.
and this is the thing. And I did it as a graphic because I was a kid who thought I didn't like history. I get to college, I take a really good class, and I start to really get into it. But then I also realize everything about the way we teach history guarantees kids won't like it. And then it's optional by the time you could access a good class.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was one of the things I really appreciated about this, because I remember my civics lessons, and my civics lessons in up to 8th grade were pretty good. Civics in high school, with again the teacher that made me think I didn't like history, because we sit there and read from a book that list of dates. You would think Jim Crow never happened for my U.S. history class in high school. You have no idea Jim Crow happened. You really kind of get into that history too. You get into who lost, who fought, who lost, who sacrificed to make this possible. And I appreciated that it wasn't preachy, it wasn't boring, but it was accurate, right? Marva is talking, other characters are talking. It's not this long, pointy, lecturing list of details. It's just part of the fabric of their lives, because really that's what it should be. It should be part of the fabric of your day-to-day life. You should know these things and approach life based off your knowledge of the world, not because there's some high horse to climb on, but because an educated and informed populace is a good thing, period.
Yeah.
That was the message. That was my takeaway message.
Yeah, no, I love it. I mean, that was the intent for sure. So
you also talk a lot about privilege, because I mean, it's like two kids having a day of voting, but it's two Black kids. So it's a specific experience that not all of us have, but this has given us a little bit of a window into it, because you have like the white boyfriend. I hope that's not a spoiler. That's like pretty early.
No, I feel like it's like in the copy or something.
And there's a discussion about what the luxury of not being able to vote. And then there is a traffic stop or a police, encounter. Yes. Okay. I was like, what is the right word for that? There's a police encounter. Yeah. And it's also something you don't often see, which is you have a Black male and a Black female in the car, and both have a slightly different point of view on it. I mean, so I just thought that was interesting when you talk about luxury privilege, and then you're seeing like the day-to-day sort of events that happen in the lives of these two young people.
Yeah, so I grew up, I hope my mom isn't watching, but if she is, she's probably seen this before anyway, because I've talked about it before. So I grew up like sort of with respectability politics. I grew up in a very white area, very conservative area, where it was just like, you just did what you had to sort of get along. You really wanted to not make any waves. You wanted people to think you were equal, and by doing that, it was like to pretend that you were perfect. So that's kind of how I was raised and how I grew up. And being raised to think that if you like, you're still Black. And of course, like I got like the talk about like doing everything, right. If I ever got stopped by policemen and all of that, but it was also sort of like a feeling when you're raised with respectability politics, is that if you do everything right, nothing's going to happen. You'll be fine. Somehow you'll come out in the end. And, for me, I feel like I grew up with a lot of privilege. I grew up middle class and kind of thinking that, and, sort of like Cosby Show values, to kind of drill it down into a pop culture term. And that can be really harmful too, because thinking that if you do everything right, that nothing's going to happen to you, that's not true. We've seen that, like Philando Castile was really the one that really hit home for me. Like he did everything right, and he's gone, he still got murdered. So I've been confronting sort of like a lot of that stuff, like really like educating myself and coming to terms with a lot of the ways that I was raised. And I don't fault my parents, because listen, they grew up in the Jim Crow South. They both grew up in rural Arkansas, picking cotton in the 50s and 60s. Like they had a completely different life, and they gave me and my brother a very good life. And they just wanted us to do whatever we could to succeed and get along in a town that really didn't love Black people. It still doesn't really love Black people. But it's an interesting thing, like confronting my own privilege and then trying to put that on the page and just convey all of that. And I guess we're all just still learning, is sort of, what I got from writing this book and thinking about the ways I was raised. And the ways I was thinking. I was not as conscious as Marva. Like, please, Marva's like who I would have loved to be at 18. I was not her. I still had a very, very long way to go.
And see, for me, it was interesting because, so longer story short, I was largely raised by my grandmother who ran numbers. She had a policy wheel. Her mother had a policy wheel. And policy, for those who don't know, is a precursor to lottery. And it was illegal, but again, now we have a lot of, so hold your breath,
Right.
hold your mule. So it's Tabitha Brown saying, hold your mule about whether or not that matters. I don't care if you don't like it. So I didn't grow up quite as respectable. A man named Policy John is how I learned how to do multiplication. Just gonna say. But one of the things, though, was that my early interactions with police were well before this point in my life. And so I have been anti-cop because when I was 12, we were harassed by police. Well, we were nerds walking to school. We were harassed by police. And it was the first time I was called the N-word was by a cop when I was 12. It wasn't just me, it was a group of us. And but I remember in the subsequent aftermath, this ties into the voting thing. He made us late for school. Another adult ended up intervening because he was just berating us at this point. He called me a pushy in B, actually. Like, it was very special. I was 12 years old in 8th grade. And my grandmother, by the time we got to school, the adults are all involved. My grandmother was able to call people Operation Push because she had been involved and other people that we knew had been involved. Because even though numbers running and the rest of it, let me tell you, the part that was respectability oriented was you will not let these politicians run over you.
Mm-hmm.
And so watching political power in action, right? To be able to go to Operation Push, to be able to go to an alderman, to understand that this is what public servants are supposed to be there for.
Mm-hmm.
It stuck with me, right? We didn't necessarily have privilege and access in the same way, but I did come to understand the importance of community in part because knowing where to go, having people in the community who did have that power, who were willing to use it to some degree, made a difference. We didn't have to see that cop again after the adults at our school and our parents and Operation Push got involved. But prior to that point, as a group of kids who were nerdy and afraid of getting in trouble, we didn't know anyone would help us because we believed him, said that he could do whatever he wanted. That was where I first started to learn about, meaningfully about checks and balances and things like that. And that adults aren't always right. And so I did appreciate seeing that too, that you don't shy away from the idea that the adults in their world aren't always right. That the adults don't know everything any more than they know everything.
So, yeah. And Marva is happy to school them.
Yes, every time.
But also the other thing that I thought was interesting that you did was she's not the only person who's, calling someone out. Like the kids, Duke talks about getting schooled like by his older brother, but also by his younger sister.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting because it like speaks to this idea that I just thought that was an interesting choice. Maybe you should just tell us could you tell us a little bit why you do that? Because I just thought it was interesting that you basically have people getting called out, but it's not just like a single generational thing. It's, across sort of privilege and age group.
Yeah. So Duke is like way more laid back. Like he's sort of voting, today in the book because he knows his older brother died. His older brother was an activist who died from gun violence. And so he knows, I think he says at one point, like, I know he's going to come haunt the shit out of me. Like his ghost, like if I don't vote today. But also his mother's, as soon as he sits down at breakfast, like, okay, you're going to vote. You're taking your sister with you. She's like, I know what to do, but like, she's an activist on her own. And so he's sort of like he's the middle kid and he just sort of feels like, he's like just pretty laid back and like, it's not that politics aren't his thing, and he's just sort of doing it because he knows he's going to get harassed by his entire family if he doesn't. And I think sometimes, like in families, there is sort of that, like, I don't know if I meant call him the black sheep in the family, but I guess he sort of would be. And he sees other people like making a difference, and he's still sort of stuck on this grief, like from his brother dying and this person he really looked up to. who was quite a bit older than him. Not having that guidance, I thought it was kind of nice that he had this younger sister who was basically like the second coming of his brother, and was like, sort of practicing her own form of activism that made their parents uncomfortable, and part of the social justice club at school. So yeah, I think we kind of, when we're growing up, and we think that, again, like Mikki was talking about, that the adults are always right and they know everything. And it's like, the older I get, the more I'm like, oh, I can learn a lot from my younger friends. And, I don't know. I just thought that was like a nice way to sort of bookend him in that like sibling order, to have the like middle kid who's laid back, and then nope, like these these two siblings of mine are not going to let me off the hook no matter what.
And they also call out their parents.
Oh yeah, they call out their parents. Their parents are like, oh, fine, which I don't think I could have done that. I don't think I still can call it. I mean, I do kind of call out my parents. Now they've grown a lot, in their own thinking, and become, I think, much more liberal the older they get. And they've always voted, Democrat, and voted with their best interests in mind. But yeah, if they say something that I'm like, no, that's offensive, or you can't say that anymore. Like, I'm fine with calling them out, but I think kids that age are more comfortable doing that now than I wasn't comfortable doing that,
Mikki,
then.
I can see this on your face.
I know.
Like, let me tell you.
Yeah, like
I mean, well, so here's the thing though. I was a bad kid. I was definitely, my mother now would say I had a rebellious spirit, but let me tell you what the language she used. But I had largely been raised by my grandmother and my aunts, and then I moved in with my mother later, and my stepfather. And my stepfather's family is very respectably oriented, and I was not like those cousins.
Not.
And so we definitely got into it, but I had one foot out the door really almost as soon. I was a teenager. I was in high school when I moved in with them, or going to start high school. So I was 8th grade. So I sort of moved in. We butted heads on multiple levels, and then I was on my way out again. Right? So we never quite reconciled a whole host of things that were why I didn't live with her, as well as subsequently, she didn't get a toddler. She didn't really get to raise me to that point. She got a teenager who was also 13 and a freshman in high school. I was 16 when I graduated from high school. So we had a whole other tier of things going on where what would be age appropriate for me was not grade appropriate, right? Choices had been made, and here were the consequences of these choices. And then I joined the Army. Like I was the kid who, I got into college. I thought about being in college at 16, because let me tell you, every college I got into, that letter about the dorms was kind of like, so can you live at home for that first year? Because our legalities. One school had some kind of foster parent thing they were offering to set up, which was not right. It was very peculiar. It was a 90s problem. Yeah. Because there was a weird thing where sometimes boys were held back and were red-shirted so that they would be older to be able to play sports. I thought at first that's where you were going when I was reading descriptions of him, because he's so and then a lot of girls were put in school earlier. And like in my case, my family, because of other shenanigans, was like, here, somebody do something with it. So I sort of coast through it. And so then I had a job at the mall and all of that. And we butted heads. And it was very much still in the era of, well, when you're 18, you can do whatever you want. Well, I didn't exactly wait till 18, because since I graduated at 16, let me tell you how little concern and care cops and others have for kids who've already finished high school in the 90s. As far as they're concerned, they have a diploma and a job. We can't be bothered. There's not enough resources for whatever this is. So I was just out. I went with friends. I left town. I did whatever. And then I joined the Army and I left the country. And so we have always had pushback in our relationship from me. And sometimes that pushback was about politics. My parents went through this phase, which they've sort of come in and out of being hyper conservative. And I mean, some kind of prayer warrior church groupy thing that I for a host of reasons, was like, okay, but that's not who you were when we were at the bowling alley when I was 10 till 2 a.m. So this is still not working. But I was the very liberal one. I'm so far left compared to them and some of their friends currently that I think that sometimes they have to explain their child to the church folks. I don't even ask, like I don't even involve them. I'm not saying their names and a bunch of other things. And I don't involve them in hood feminism and other bits of my work because I feel like it would be unfair to put them in the midst of my choices for my life. And I know, they are not the choices they would have made for me necessarily. And I think that that's another thing that you kind of talk a little bit about when you're talking about, gun violence and all of these things in the book, is that the kids don't have to be perfect to be involved. The kids don't have to make all the decisions. And I sort of appreciate the fact that we get the they don't exist in a world where everyone is perfect and trying to do the right thing all the time. Because I sometimes find it a little jarring in YA when the kids exist in a world where there are no bad kids or the bad kids blob in space. And instead we kind of see that there's more going on, that these things that are happening aren't happening because his brother was a bad kid who got shot, right? There are things that are happening because this is life in the inner city for Black people, and that life sometimes is messy and complicated and hard. And so I really appreciate that. I'm sorry, I had a whole soapbox in the middle of your book.
No, I love it. Listen.
We have a few questions. I actually have some craft questions, but I want to make sure we get to a couple of the audience questions because we got the transitioning to audience questions segment. But if we don't, I'll come back to the craft questions.
All right.
Okay, so here's a person asking about how they are actually voting by mail. They plan to vote by mail. Will the book still speak to that, or maybe speak to them? Maybe we could speak to that more broadly, because I know there is a push for vote by mail. So I think this person's asking, how can this book relate to that?
Yeah, that is a good question. So I usually did not vote by mail this last time. Whenever I voted, I guess it was this year, before the pandemic, but I don't even remember. Yeah, that's a good point. I don't address that in there, unfortunately, because it was written.
You didn't predict the pandemic?
Yeah, I didn't predict the pandemic. I guess I should have talked to Obama's pandemic response team. It's been disassembled. Yeah, I didn't, but I hope that people exercise that right if they have the choice. That's something that I've been signed up for, absentee voting for a long time, just because, especially with traveling and stuff, I never knew what if I'm not in town, or what if I can't get to the polls, just things that you never expect will happen. But I think what the book does address mostly is that vote, do whatever you can to vote.
Also check your voter registration.
Check your voter registration. I've been purged from the rolls before, and I'm like, seriously? I move so much that I'm constantly being re-registered to vote, and realized a couple of years ago that I had been purged from the rolls, and I was like, that's interesting. It's funny. I saw a comment yesterday about how someone was very upset that these kids were missing school to vote, and they just couldn't believe. Yeah, I know. I
mean, honestly, a lot of countries actually have voting the day of the election is a holiday, or it's a Saturday.
Exactly. It should be a holiday, or it should be at a time when more people can go. So I think that, by saying do whatever you got to do to vote, I think that encompasses all kinds of things, like voting by mail. I'm not advocating kids to skip school. These kids did. I think it's fine. I think my parents would have been like, all right, cool. We don't like you skipping
Marva
school.
almost never skips school. It's basically an emergency situation.
Exactly, which is what I think it is. I think it is an emergency to make sure that you can get to vote. So yeah, I think that's the overall theme of the book. So I hope that applies to things that aren't covered in the book even.
Well, the book definitely talks about, people should check their voter registration. And this goes back to Mikki, what you were saying about the importance of voting local. In Chicago, we have same day registration. We have early voting. We have mail-in ballot. We have same day registration. We've got every single thing, and not just Chicago, in Illinois. And that's because the people voted in, leaders who are going to get that. So
yeah, I was going to say one of the things about the pandemic that, even though that wasn't the reason we had early voting, I was going on book tour. So before we ever got to voting day and whatever, I went to vote at one of the early voting centers just on my way out of town, because originally I wasn't necessarily going to be there for voting day. And reading this, I did think to myself, man, this all would have been so much easier if it wasn't just a single day, because I am a big proponent of that voting window, right?
Yeah.
Holiday day is fine, but I understand people work retail, other jobs, illness happens, whatever. And I think that 2 to 3 week window for mail-in voting and early voting, I think that would have such a huge impact if it were the norm in every place.
I agree. Yeah. I mean, in I know in Illinois, it really helped. I mean, I love having like 3 weeks, like to do it. It's awesome. So here is, here's a question. This has been a great evening. Thank you all. What are your thoughts on, I'll ask you all these political questions, which I guess is understanding. What are your thoughts on popular vote versus electoral votes? Is it time to abolish the Electoral College?
Yes.
You know,
I know. I was like, the one word answer is yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to pretend to be more educated about this than I am, but yes, I do believe.
So I'm working on something that talks a little bit about this, and I'm going to say that the Electoral College unfairly advantages states with low populations and no major population centers, shall we say, and does so deliberately to guarantee that the majority of the country's votes actually that might not be white landowners actually count less. And so we don't really have a need for the Electoral College anymore. Right. It kind of sort of made sense in the days when counting votes by hand wasn't a problem, but it's 300 years later almost.
Right. Well, and the other thing, there's so many problems with the Electoral College. I wish people would like know the history of it, but there's also, I mean, you can even see some of it, how it plays out in just like the Senate, because the majority does not represent the majority of the people in literal numbers.
Exactly.
But also there's some states where like for the Electoral College, you're basically voting for an elector, essentially, who's going to then cast the vote, who hopefully for the person that you cast the vote for, like you wanted to vote for.
You have no idea if your vote counts.
At all. Because in some states, it is not required for the elector to vote for the person that they declared that they were going to vote for.
And
that is so wild to me.
For the elector to vote for the person with the most votes in the state.
Yeah. It's like, to me, that's bananas.
The Electoral College requires. Most people think it requires that this person has won the popular vote in your state and now the Electoral College rep. And there's a whole thing about how you become an Electoral College rep, which we don't have an entire history class worth of time for. But long story short, we don't have a good purpose for it, and it's been manipulated for years.
Yeah.
To essentially, even though it's not technically stealing an election, there's a reason you can win the popular vote and still lose.
Yeah, and Kevin twice just in our recent memory.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
And Clinton. It's happened.
Yeah.
Yep.
So. It's like fun. I know. It's one person, one vote. That's what we should have. We do not have it. That's it.
One person, one vote, and we could electronic mail in, whatever. But let's just count the votes. Popular vote wins the way we go.
Yes.
Yeah. I totally agree.
Here's the next one. Obviously, COVID-19 has changed the way we experience the world. How do you think COVID will change the stories authors tell? Will you still focus on contemporaries, or will you try another genre?
That's a great question. So I saw a thread on this on Twitter last week. It felt like, I don't know, I don't think you contributed to this one, Samira, I don't want to, okay. But it just felt like kind of a lot of like hand wringing over like, what are we going to do? And I'm like, we don't even know where this is going to go. We don't know what the end of the year is going to look like. So for me personally, I don't feel it's something I need to include in my fiction right now. Also, it's fiction. So, it's just, I understand if you're writing it for a specific point in time. If your book is set, like, thankfully COVID was not around when I was writing this book, or it would have been like, that would have been some plot points I would have had to like reconfigure, with how people are going to vote and what they're worried about, because it is set during the 2020 election. But I also just think like it's fiction, like you can take those liberties with it. And I honestly just think we're going to be seeing the effects of this for several years down the road. So I don't want to write something in, like, I hate dating my books. I won't even put like social media in my books. My books have never named like Facebook, Instagram, or anything like that.
Right. Yes, it's interesting because here you basically have Instagram in there, but you don't call it anything.
Exactly. Oh, it's 100% Instagram, but I like don't like coming up with fake names for social media. So I just just say they posted, it's a picture site, so it's Instagram. But yeah, I just feel like we are so far out from knowing the long-term effects of this. And I'm also curious, like, what writers were doing in 1918. Like, I don't particularly remember a lot of fiction addressing.
I mean, I think about it in terms of 9/11, like just as like, for example, as a Muslim writer, a lot of my books address Islamophobia, even like if they're not. I mean, like my third book isn't about Islamophobia, but there's pieces of like those microaggressions in there because that's just part of regular life.
Yeah.
And I have had references to 9/11, even though my characters aren't living at the time of 9/11 and teens now don't. But like, there's a lot of white authors who never reference 9/11 for their teens or their families who might have been affected by it. For me, I have to, because when I talk about like the riot, when I talk about Islamophobia in a way, the parents of those kids, parents react in a certain way, often to just protect their kids. And that.
What's the name of your book, Samira?
Which book would that?
Well, in Internment, that specifically addresses Islamophobia, but both in Love, Hate, and Other Filters and in Mad, Bad, and Dangerous to Know, there are references to it because it sort of shades how it kind of, that's like the window to my world. But I mean, there's like plenty of white authors who are writing books that don't reference it in any way, and they're set in the same time. So I think I don't know, I think it's interesting who's sort of how people think we should be writing about certain historical events that for me changed a lot of the way I look on my world, but for others have no effect.
So, and it's funny because the project I just did, the Cereal Box, we originally had a different plot point that, while not COVID based, was close enough that we had to make some changes before we went to publication. It's very up to the line. But I'm working on something right now where I kind of talk about COVID only because I had started writing it before COVID, and I had seen an article about the risk of pandemics, and the flu done a lot, H1N1, all of that. And I think that it's going to be just like any other pandemic, right? We've talked about pandemics before, we'll talk about them again, but this is not the first time this has happened in the world. It's certainly not likely to be the last. So I think our fiction will just reflect the fact that, continue to reflect the reality that we live in, in whatever ways we happen to write it, but it's not necessarily guaranteed. But if you go listen to Cereal Box's Black Widow Bad Blood, you might notice some words and some phrases and some changes. You might be like, that sounds a little tricky, because we didn't want to, while everything was happening, even though the story wasn't about it at all, we didn't want to even indirectly date the story to this particular
Plus every reader who lived through this brings their own view onto the book anyway.
That's true. Yeah, I think like I'm actually going backward. The question also mentioned, like, are you going to pursue other genres? No, I think I'm pretty hardcore realistic fiction, but I've been incorporating a lot of historical into my work. Like my most recent middle grade, The Only Black Girls in Town, and then I have some upcoming work that I can't talk about yet, but I do have a nonfiction book that was announced.
Oh yes, right. Congratulations.
That is like, oh, thank you. That's about the Tulsa Race Massacre in 1921. So I feel like I'm sort of moving back as I get more and more interested in like historical events and what happened then. So maybe, I don't know, when I'm like 7.
Fiction is great. I wish authors of color would be writing more historical fiction.
Yeah, like Stacey Lee has got
amazing. I know. Stacey Lee is like always like my go-to on that.
Oh my God. Yep.
She's amazing.
Best. Yeah.
I think I'm going to just quickly get in the last question. I'm going to just kind of, it's sort of the question is sort of like, who's your favorite author currently writing about topics that you wish more people knew about? It's a little twist on that question.
I know. Oh my God.
Even if that's too hard, then, maybe just what you're, reading right now. Reading's a little tough right now, but maybe there's something you can recommend.
Yeah, it's been a little tough. I'm trying to think. I mean, I've been reading everything. I feel like I've been reading for blurbs and stuff, so like books I can't quite like talk about yet. But one book I just recently finished, I really enjoyed, was like actually a chapter book for kids. It's Renee Watson's Ways to Make Sunshine.
Oh, I love Renee. I just bought that book.
Oh my God, it's so good. Like it's like it's kind of, I don't know if I should say based on the Ramona series. I don't want to speak for her, but Renee grew up in Portland, Oregon. And so it's like kind of the Black girl version of Ramona, but like very much her own. It's a little girl named Ryan Hart. And just like watching her like thinking about having those books as a kid, because I loved the Ramona books. I loved Ramona so much. And they're like some of the first books I remember being able to read on my own. And so like reading about this little girl, Ryan Hart, who like looks, like I looked, and is going, just having her little adventures, but with that additional context of like being a Black girl, like, I loved it. It was chef's kiss.
Awesome. Mikki, do you have a book you can recommend?
I have a couple actually, and I wanted to make sure that I was getting the title right. Disability Visibility by Alice Wong.
Oh yeah, I've heard a lot about that.
Yes, it just came out June 30th. You should get it. It's really good. I was supposed to blurb it, and then I didn't because I am a mess. It's not her, it's me.
It's hard.
George and Johnson's All Boys Aren't Blue.
Oh yes, so great. Oh, I have that right next to me too. So good.
That cover is beautiful too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I've really been enjoying sort of this new crop of people kind of putting out, this is my world. These are the worlds of people around me. Not that fiction isn't also good. I've definitely seen some good fiction. It's just that I think we've not heard of enough from these voices. So I'm happy to see nonfiction branching out.
The book I just started reading. So The Voting Booth obviously is one that everyone should pick up. And there's a buy the book button right at the bottom of your screen. Please make good use of it. I'm not gonna lie. I was like, I'm having trouble reading a little bit right now, but The Voting Booth was like a fast weekend read for me. And I'm actually on deadline. So I loved it because it has like a pace. I wanted to see what was going to happen. So it was great. And the other book that I'm reading that I'm really enjoying right now is called Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed.
Oh, I have that. I haven't read it yet.
I'm sure all of these books that we mentioned can be bought at Women and Children First. Brandy, do you want to wrap up with any final thoughts or words?
Oh gosh. I mean, no, I hope, that the book inspires people to use your voice the best way you can. If there are any teens or tweens watching this right now, just Marva in the book mentions the different ways that you can get involved before you turn 18, like canvassing and, things that hopefully you'll feel safe doing and that have been approved by parents or guardians. But, canvassing, phone banking, text banking.
Text banking, yeah.
Yeah. Sending postcards. I think there is something for going to protests, whatever. I'm not a person who goes to protests, but I'm a person who can speak openly and honestly to people and have, uncomfortable discussions in person. It doesn't bother me. So just use your voice the best way that you can and that you see fit. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm just going to hold this book out one more time. Yay. And yes, also this is fantastic. So thank you, Women and Children First, and Mikki and Brandy. It was so awesome to see you.
Thank you both so much. I was hoping we would have gotten to do this in person, but this is obviously the next best thing. So I super appreciate you guys taking time out to do this with me.
Happy to do it. This is a really important book. I hope a lot of people go buy it.
I agree. And they're going to love it too. It's like a gift for yourself and to the children in your life.
And go buy Mikki's and Samira's books as well.
Yeah, I'm going to hold this one up too. I know we're talking about hood feminism, but I really want more people to read this also. I love this one.
It's like, listen, the whole thing is that it's supposed to teach your kid a bunch of history in a fun way, so they'll want to read it. So
I think they're a perfect pair. I think this two.
Yeah,
these two are a good pair. Yes.
Yes, definitely. We should talk to our publishers.
I know. I was going to say.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.